أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome once again to Islam in Focus. Today we have in the series Sources of Islam, the 41st, and to be more specific, it is the 9th on the authenticity of the Quran. The topic today is the arrangements of the Quran. I welcome once again Dr. Jamal Badawi, and I'm your host, Rashad Mamish. Hi, Jamal. Wa alaikum salam. Maybe, like we usually do it, summary of last week's program.
Certainly. The main focus on last week's program was on the piecemeal or gradual approach in which the Quran was revealed. And 4 points were particularly emphasized. First, we examined the internal evidence that is from the Quran itself about the gradual nature of revelation of the Quran and how it was revealed. Secondly, we expanded a little bit on 2 terms used in the Quran, unzila wa nuzila, one of which, the second one, means gradual revelation or gradual coming down. And we said that frequently the Quran is referred to as nuzila, which means revealed to in piecemeal approach. The third point was that in addition to this internal evidence from the Quran itself and its terminology, we find that there are lots of historical evidence that shows the Quran was not revealed all at once. The Quran itself indeed discusses and comments on many historical events, some of which took place in the very beginning of prophethood of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, extending all the way to the end of his mission, which is about 23 years. So that again is a manifestation that the Quran actually was revealed in piecemeal. The fourth and final question or point was why? Why was the Quran revealed in this gradual approach? Why not revealed all at once? And we discussed some of the reasons for that, some of which include the strengthening of the Prophet in view of the opposition and hurt that he was suffering from unbelievers. So the gradual revelation kept refreshing him and keeping contact with his mission. That the Quran is intended not as a book for blessing or something like that, but as a dynamic book, a book for movement, for change in society. And the fact that it was revealed over 23 years gave an ample opportunity for directing the lives of people and commenting on them. So you had almost a major case study, if you will, extending over 23 years to show us a model as to how we can solve our human problems within the boundaries of divine revelation. And that gives, of course, infinite flexibility to the teaching of Islam, so it does not grow obsolete. So at any moment of time or point of history, one can go back to those principles and see the model of implementation and try to find solution to recurring problems. Another reason was to provide an evidence for those who suspected or claimed that the Quran was not divine revelation, it was a composition of the Prophet and all other claims, to challenge those who oppose the Quran to produce something like it. If the Quran really was human, and they are human, why not produce something similar to it? And they failed, and to give them, of course, ample opportunity, and they could not. And finally, of course, we said that, as has been discussed previously under the authority of the Quran, that this was one of the miracles of the Quran, that you have 114 surahs, not necessarily revealed in the order that we find them in the Quran, and then not always revealed at the same time, and then you get a little bit revealed from this surah, a little from that surah, and then at the end everything is an integrated whole that showed that there was a pre-plan or pre-design of what to be contained in the Quran, including future events that are going to take place about which the Quran is going to comment, and then everything finally fits together. It means that it is something beyond the ability of any human, especially the knowledge of the unseen. So these were some of the major reasons on the fourth point, why was the Quran revealed in this gradual or piecemeal fashion, if you will.
Well, thanks for this summary. Maybe we'll get to today's topic. Now, it might be helpful in order to introduce the topic itself if you could give us an idea of the size of the Quran itself and exactly how is it divided.
Okay, let me address the second part first, if I may.
Okay.
In terms of the division of the Quran, it is divided into 114 surahs. The singular is surah, S-U-R-A-H. The reason I use surah, even though sometimes we use the word chapter in place of that, but the word surah actually is the more accurate one. The reason why the term chapter is not very applicable to the Quran is that when you say chapter, we get the impression of the human books or books authored by humans, where one chapter deals with one subject, then you move on to the next chapter dealing with a different subject, and there's not much overlap in the material covered. And as we will see later, I don't know whether we'll have time for that today, but maybe in some future program, that the Quran is quite unique in the way it deals with various topics and various subjects, and as such it is not really subjugated to this human approach of having one separate chapter per topic. The Quran is not a book of science or a book of any other discipline that we are familiar with. I think it might be useful perhaps to elaborate a little bit on the term surah instead of chapter as one unit in the Quran. Literally speaking, surah means eminence or a high degree or a step in a structure. But as a terminology, of course, it talks about the various units, the 114 units, if you will, which are contained in the Quran. That's the first basic subdivision. And then each of these surahs contains a number of ayahs, A-Y-A-H for a singular, or ayat. Again, the word ayah sometimes is referred to as verse. And I might have used that term sometimes maybe for the purpose of communication. But it's not really the most accurate term. Why again? Because the term verse seemed to give the connotated meaning of a verse in a poem, for example. And in our discussion of the linguistic miracle of the Quran, we have seen that it's quite unique. It is not exactly poetry, it's not exactly prose, it's something quite different and quite inimitatable. So the word verse again might not be really the best word, even though we have used that just as an approximate meaning for communication purpose. But actually the proper word is ayah. Again, like we explained the meaning of surah, we might as well explain also what the word ayah means and why it's more accurate. Yeah. Okay. Ayah literally means a manifest sign, a mark, a message. In some cases it is used also to mean a miracle. And that is much closer to the meaning of the Quran, that each ayah in the Quran really contains certain message, contains a sign of its source, the divine source, contains a miracle in terms of the content and wisdom and the style in which this information is presented. So now we have the 114 surahs, and then we have this, within each surah or unit, this number of ayahs. The number of ayahs in each surah varies from very long to very short. The longest in the Quran is the second surah in the order that we have in the Quran, and that's known as Surah Al-Baqarah, the second one. It has 286 ayahs. The shortest is 3. There are actually 3 surahs in the Quran, 103, 108, and 110, each of which has only 3 ayahs. So you can imagine, it's almost like 3 lines versus, quite substantial. As far as the total number of ayahs in the Quran, that is in all of the 114 surahs, it comes about 6,200. That's 6,200 ayahs total in the Quran. Some even tried to count the number of words, and it came close to about 80,000 words. And that might give some indication about the first part of the question, the size of the Quran, about 80,000 words, roughly.
Maybe for the benefit of our viewers who are familiar with the Bible, if you could just give us a comparison as the structure of the Quran as compared with the structure of the Bible?
Well, perhaps we can summarize that in 4 basic differences, and I think that might be useful so that the viewers who are familiar with the Bible can at least, understand how the 2 scriptures are similar or different in some respects or the other. But the 4 basic differences, if I were to summarize them very quickly, one is that the Bible is composed of a number of books. See, the book of Genesis, the book of Deuteronomy, and so on, composed of books. And each book is divided into chapters, and then each chapter is divided, as we all know, in terms of verses. Whereas, as we have seen in the Quran, there are no books in the Quran. The Quran is all one book, and it's just composed of these surahs and ayahs. So there is some basic difference there in terms of the nature of the structure of both scriptures. Second difference is that the Bible is basically chronological in its order. In other words, it starts from beginning to end, almost like a historical survey, if you will, starting all the way, as we all know, from the first book in the Bible, the book of Genesis, creation and all that, down to Prophet Noah, to Abraham, to the Prophet Moses and the Israelite prophets, down to the New Testament, Prophet Jesus, peace be upon him, and the writings of his disciples. In other words, it's almost like chronological, gradual or successive type of information. Again, as we will see later, the Quran is not necessarily arranged in any particular historical chronology of that nature at all. It's not just a story about creation. It's quite different and unique in the way it contains its information. A third basic difference is that the Bible is substantially bigger than the Quran. In taking the number of words, the Quran is quite bigger, quite big, I'd say, possibly because it contains much more details about historical events, names of individuals, names of places, and so on. But basically, the size is quite bigger than the Quran. A fourth difference, which is related also, is that, as we all know, the Bible contains a number of books that were written by a large number of authors over a long period of time, hundreds of years, in different places, under different circumstances. And in many cases we find that some of the authors of these books write basically as they are writing a biography or sort of their own account of what happened. It is not always claimed by the writers that it is purely divine revelation that they had no control on. For example, in the first chapter of the Gospel according to Luke, in the first 3 verses, he makes it clear that he knew that some other people have written that is about Jesus, peace be upon him, but he thought it is fitting also for him to write. So there is no claim really that this is something that I have received, but I thought it would be nice also and appropriate to write. Whereas we cannot find any reference whatsoever in the Quran of anything that might indicate in some way or the other, directly or indirectly, that there was any human authorship involved or claim by any person, including Prophet Muhammad himself, that he thought it would be, for example, appropriate to write this or that. As we have discussed amply under the topic of authority of the Quran, it is all from A to Z. Divine revelation, it's always God speaking in some form or the other, but there is no indication at all of human authorship. And the Quran is not like the Bible, for example, or like the New Testament, let's say, a biography about the life of a given prophet. It's quite different from that. And I think it's useful to be aware of these issues so that at least we can understand in what sense the scriptures are similar or different in that respect.
Now you mentioned earlier that there were 114 surahs within the Quran.
Right.
I'd like to maybe ask you about the order that they're found in. I mean, is this the same order that it was actually revealed that we read in the Quran now?
No, not really. For example, many of the earlier revelations that were revealed in Mecca appear in the Quran, for example, in the end rather than at the beginning. So it's almost not exactly the reverse, but I mean it's not necessarily in the order in which these surahs or units were revealed. For example, from surah number 67 on, Surah Al-Mulk, from 67 until 114, they are almost all, maybe with the exception of a couple of surahs, all of them were revealed in Mecca, which was earlier revelation, in fact, than some of the surahs that appear in the beginning of the Quran. Surah Al-Baqarah, for example, is largely revealed in Medina, and it appears in as a second in the order of the Quran. The other thing that is quite unique about the Quran, which was discussed also under authority of the Quran, which is rather amazing, is that it is true that some of the surahs or units were revealed at once, but that's especially applicable to most of the short surahs. You know, if you have just a few lines, many times these were revealed all at once. But on the other hand, the strange thing about the Quran is that some, or many, I would say, many of the longer surahs, while some of them might have been revealed at once, but many of the longer surahs were revealed over a long period of time. In one program, just to refresh our memory, it was stated that the second surah of the Quran, which is the longest, Surah Al-Baqarah, was revealed over a period of 9 years. Some here, some there. And of course, over this period of year, revelation was still coming. So it was not just waiting until one surah is completed. They were at many times simultaneously. There are a number of surahs that are incomplete, and the revelation would come, and this will be put here, this will be put there, this will be put here, which is quite unique to my understanding among all other scriptures. On the basis of this, it is my understanding that any attempt to arrange the Quran strictly in terms of the order, historical order of revelation of the surahs or units, is just an impossible task, really.
Maybe in view of what you said, maybe I'll ask you to comment on the translation of the Quran by Dawood, which apparently follows a different arrangement from the other translations.
Yes, actually, to my limited knowledge, it's the only translation of the meaning of the Quran which deviates and differs from all other translations that we know of in any language, for that matter. And what Mr. Dawood did actually was to claim that he arranged the surahs or units of the Quran according to the order or chronology of their revelation. Before comment on that, I'd just like to make another side comment here that might be useful, because some friends sometimes put that question to me, and he said, all right, I thought he was a Muslim and that this is acceptable to Muslims. And to my information, Mr. Dawood is not a Muslim, even though the name Dawood.
Oh, I see.
You know, many Muslims also are called Dawood, but some mistakenly think that this is, you know, a Muslim translator, and as such reflect the views and understanding and traditions of Muslim. In fact, he's not. Because after all, no Muslim I have ever heard throughout the 1400 years since the revelation of the Quran have ever tried to tamper with the Quran, including even the order in which the surahs were revealed, and just try to put it together and say, all right, this is the order. But in addition to the fact that this is rather, I would say offensive really to Muslims for someone who has little knowledge about Islam to come up with some innovation after 1400 years and claim to have a more valid type of arrangement. Scholarly speaking, it is erroneous. Because when you say, all right, I'll order the surahs or units of the Quran according to the order of revelation, then you're giving the false impression to the reader. Even if you make reservation, you're giving the false impression that the entire content of a given surah was revealed before another surah, or else what is the sense of having this chronology? And let me give you two examples to indicate how this kind of arrangement is, scholarly speaking, very inappropriate. The first surah that are believed to have been revealed first in the Quran is surah number 96. And of course, if anyone makes a translation of the Quran and put that as the first surah, he would be committing a grave mistake. Why? The thing that is certain historically is that this surah was not all revealed as the first surah, but only the first few verses or few ayahs in that surah that were revealed, not the whole surah. That is when Angel Gabriel came to the Prophet in the cave of Hira and so on. In fact, if you read the same surah, it's not a very long one, in later part of the surah it is clear that it took place maybe years after, because it talks, for أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي يَنْهَى, it talks about those who try to forbid the Prophet from praying. And we all know that the Prophet started his mission more quietly and secretly, and then later on, people started attacking him when he declared the message, and that was a long time after.
Definite time difference there.
There's different time difference. To put the whole surah as number one in terms of chronology or order of revelation is obviously a mistake. The other example we just mentioned a few minutes ago, take the second surah in the Quran, that is in the authentic Quran that we have, Al-Baqarah, the longest one. We said it was revealed over 9 years. And at the same time, over this 9 years, numerous other surahs or units were also revealed. So where do you put the second surah in terms of orders? It's a very, mistaken to think that anyone can say, all right, this surah comes first and run from number 1 to 114 on the basis of chronological order of revelation. It just can't be.
It's stated that certain Muslim scholars have written about the chronological order of the surahs within the Quran. Maybe I'll ask you to comment on how that differs from Dawood's translation.
There are important differences. It is true to start with that, yes, some even Muslim writers and historians have mentioned, for example, that this surah, for example, was revealed before that surah. But when they say this surah or unit was revealed first or second, they actually mean one of two things. One is that, as we indicated before, there are some surahs, in fact, that were revealed fully, completely. So there is some degree of certitude that, yes, this surah as an entire surah was revealed before this one. So there is one section that this could be correct and applicable. But when they say some surahs, other surahs like number 96 was revealed first, for example, they put it with the great reservation that not only they don't mean this surah, but perhaps the major part of that surah. See, and that's a big difference. The major part of that surah was revealed first, but of course, when they do that, they realize and they state that it is impossible really to arrange the Quran in the chronology of revelation. For one, we don't have enough conclusive information about that order to start with. Some we are sure, yes, that this surah or this part of the surah was revealed first or last or somewhere in Mecca or Medina. But I haven't seen yet any historian who claimed to have had any complete and conclusive, certain evidence of the chronological order of the revelation of all the surahs of the Quran. So the claim itself is really quite big. So when they do that, they say also there are also differences in that, not that it is a certain thing. The third difference is that when they mention this, they put that in great reservation as information for scholarly study, for legislative purposes, to find out the evolution or the change, for example, in the gradual legislative aspects of Islam. But none of them, to my knowledge, have said, all right, here is a different order of the Quran, and print the whole Quran, for example, as Dawood did, and say, all right, this is surah, this surah was revealed first, second, third, until the last revelation. They provide this by way of articles, by way of information. So I think it's not quite the same.
Some writers have claimed that there are actual reports that Ali's collection of the Quran was arranged according to the order of revelation. Now, is that true?
Well, to start with, Ali, the cousin of the Prophet, may Allah be pleased with him, is the last person to tamper with the Quran, even the arrangement of the surahs of the Quran after there have been unanimity among the Muslim after the Prophet that this is the order which the Prophet showed them. At least we'll talk about that in some detail perhaps a little later. But according to many scholars also, that report is at best questionable, if not sheer unauthentic in terms of its historicity. What is even more important, aside from the proper authentication of that report, which is lacking, is that it is rather illogical and contrary to known facts of Islamic history. Let me clarify specifically, if I may. We all know that Ali, the cousin of the Prophet, actually reigned as the caliph or khalifa, the head of the whole Muslim ummah, the chief of the state, after Uthman, the third caliph. He was the fourth. And we all know that the copies that were made of the Quran that were sent to all over the world in that arrangement was done during the reign of Uthman. So he came immediately after the death of Uthman. Being a ruler himself, if it were true that there were any arrangement in of the Quran, of the various units or surahs, which are different from the one that has been accepted universally by Muslims. He was already in power. Why didn't he reveal it? Why didn't he pass it on to followers or descendants? In fact, there is no evidence at all that any such thing actually existed or was passed by Ali. Ali himself gave lots of praise also to Abu Bakr during whose time the first compilation of the Quran was put together. And this was the same copy from which Osman made the copies that were sent all over the world. So logically speaking, in terms of the historical information, there is no such clear evidence of it.
There are also similar claims that certain companions of the Prophet actually had copies with a different arrangement. How would you respond to that?
Yes, there are some reports, like for example, Ubay ibn Ka'b, one of the companions of the Prophet. It is claimed again that he had in his own collection a Quran that has a slight difference in terms of the order of the various units or surahs. But again, scholars have indicated that this report is very unauthentic. It's very weak. It doesn't have much support. But even if we assume for the sake of discussion that it were true, you know what they say? They say that in his collection he put surah number 4 before surah number 3, which is very insignificant, but even then it's not really authentic. But even if that were true, we all know that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, used to lead the prayer and recite the Quran in the prayers. And it is permissible, as the Prophet did actually, to recite the various surahs in prayers, in public prayers, not necessarily in the order in which they appear in the Quran, but in different orders. You can move back and forth. That has been proven actually. For example, there was a saying or hadith narrated in Ahmad collection that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, sometimes recited the second surah first, and then he recited the fourth surah. So you move from 2 to 4. But this does not mean that this is the way the beliefs or the written Quran should be arranged. Another report also claims that Ibn Mas'ud, another companion, had a different combination. They called Ta'lif Ibn Mas'ud, which was again slightly different. But again, we know again that the Prophet sometimes used to recite more than one surah in the Quran. And Ibn Mas'ud used to imitate the Prophet, and he loved to do things exactly like the Prophet did. So sometimes he put the 2 surahs together, or 2 units. But this does not mean at all that it was a different valid order in any sense. And Ibn Mas'ud himself, like many others, have all accepted the universal Quran as the Quran that we have in our hands today.
I think we've run out of time again. Thank you very much, Dr. Jamal, and thank you all very much for joining us. We hope to see you once again next week in Islam in Focus. From all of us, Assalamu alaikum.